Afternoon. It's going to be on fair attribution in practice. My name is Karen Glerum Brooks, and I am a training and resources the development officer for the Valuing Voices project. And so is Lucy, my co-host. And we're also very happy to have with us Harriet Evans Tang, who's going to tell a bit about the project she's been doing with her colleagues on fair attribution in global health research, which is a project that was actually financed by Valuing Voices. So today, we're looking at fair attribution. Why is that under the Valuing Voices umbrella? Well, that's because it's very relevant to at least two of our principles for equitable and responsible research that we, as the Valuing Voices project, are trying to promote. And so, obviously, it's closely related to equity and diversity in teams. Fair attribution is all about making a more level playing field and giving everybody the recognition they deserve. And it's also closely related to engagement and impact. So as a university for public good, we're trying to bring the outside world into our research to really focus that research on solutions that the world needs. And when you think about bringing those people in, you also have to think about, well, how we're going to make sure that their contributions are recognized too, and not just those of the academics. So that's the reason why fair attribution is such a good fit for Valuing Voices, and that's why we're here today. So today's schedule is looking in really practical ways to fair attribution. So we're going to explore how we define ownership of research. Whose research is it actually? We're going to look at understanding the principles of fair attribution and their application. So what do you put where? Do you make person a co-author? Do you acknowledge somebody in the acknowledgement? And we're going to consider the wider context of contribution to research through non-traditional outputs and practical tips. So we're hoping that this will be a very practical, helpful session with tips you can directly apply to your work. As a starter for 10, just to get a little bit of an idea of how you think about contributions and ownership of research and fair attribution. We'd like to invite you to put in the chat in what ways you contribute to research. So how would you describe your contribution to the processes that go on in the university? So if you would like to share that in the chat, that would be great. So we've got support for funding applications, and we got a like already as well for that one. So that's definitely something we look at. Project management, support for public involvement. Thank you, Rachel. It's a good one. So that's basically a lot of facilitation, managing research facilities, supporting research to develop their skills, supporting projects in various ways, including funding, coordination of publications. So we seem to have a lot of people here who are supporting the processes of research, and it's probably also a group that sometimes is not very clearly in focus for the researchers, and something they should be thoughtful of. What else have we got here? Strengthening conditions for producing excellent research, funding applications. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So I'll now hand over to Lucy, who's going to talk some more about who owns research and who whose contribution should be acknowledged. Over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Karen. So behind today's session, I suppose, which as Karen said will be practical, there are some looming questions about the ownership of research and who owns research and what kind of research we produce and who's included in that. So I've just put a few questions on this slide to think about really and to contextualize the things we're going to be talking about today. So there's the question of who decides what a research output is. And those more traditional research outputs of, publications, really, we're thinking about maybe part of what a funder is asking for when a project is funded is certainly part of the reward and recognition schemes within academia and how you get promoted and how you build your career as a researcher. And other bodies set these requirements as well, for example, REF and the kind of outputs that are asked for there. So there's the context of the traditional research output that's part of a research career, the publications, but also that's kind of demanded by the wider context. But there are also those more non-traditional outputs in research that might be created with communities, the public that you work with. It might take the form of workshops, creative outputs, even podcasts now, and those kind of are becoming more and more part of what research is and the way it's seen, and part of our project is to think about how they can be recognised more fully as well. And with that comes the question of who owns research outputs. So obviously the university itself owns the intellectual property of those who work for the university. But if you are named on a publication, then you have the copyright to that publication. Um, and that when we're thinking about non-traditional outputs, it poses the question of if community groups, members of the public have been involved in the creation of an output and have shared their knowledge and have contributed, how do they own that output as well? And that's what we're going to think a little bit about today when we talk about attribution. And one way of ensuring that everyone who's contributed to a research output is named on it is are the kind of systems we're going to look at today. So those are just kind of some wider questions, and I think Harriet's project will speak to them even more broadly as well. But they're just things to keep in mind as we go through, and as we think about the kind of the changing landscape of academia, and the kind of outputs that are now part of research process and part of public engagement and part of creating an impact through your research. So the fair attribution guidance that the university and Megan, who's on the call, has been absolutely instrumental in writing this guidance and making it happen, is one step towards ensuring that everyone who contributes to research in various different ways and in all the different ways that we've mentioned in the chat today are attributed for that work, because research is an extremely complex thing to produce. There are layers and layers of that production. So it's about unpacking that and ensuring that everybody who was part of that process is acknowledged. And obviously you can take that forward as professional development. So I've just got a few key quotes from the guidance here on the slide. So fair attribution is designed to foster an open, transparent, and consistent approach to attribution on outputs across the institution. So I think the key thing here is that consistency, formalizing ways of attributing different team members and different groups to outputs. And yes, the sentiment is to be open and transparent, but also it's to have a process in place through which we can do that and be consistent across the institution and beyond. So it's there to help everyone in the research community get a clearer sense of when it's appropriate to recognise the contribution of an individual to a research output. And we'll unpack that a little bit as we go through. We all contribute in lots of different ways, but there are systems that can help us kind of really pinpoint what that contribution has been to ensure that those grey areas can be unpacked and people can be clearly attributed. And it's to ensure the contribution of everyone involved in the research is recognised, valued, and supported. That really is the ethos behind why we have this guidance. And the kind of research culture we're trying to create by ensuring that it's inclusive, that people are recognised for the everyday work of research, and the kind of the many different roles that we all play within it. So there's a link to the guidance on this slide, which I'll be sharing afterwards as well. So with that, I'll hand over to Karen to think a little bit more about how this kind of relates to the research team, and the different structures that we have.
Thanks, Lucy. So yeah, the question on this slide is who makes a research team, and that seems probably a pretty straightforward question at first sight. So you have the researchers. And you probably think about the group that sort of like is the core group of the project, but even when you think about researchers, you know, there may be people outside the university, maybe in different parts of the world, who may actually doing a lot of research on the ground. Think of, you know, research nurses in hospitals, or community researchers in different parts. So they may not be on every call, but they're definitely doing some of the hard work. So it's important to think actually quite carefully about this group to start with. Then you have all the technical staff, people who may be doing fairly routine work, but nevertheless really important work. I think, for example, in the York Trials unit where I work as well, there's a whole data team who make sure that the data is complete, stored safely, and absolutely crucial to the trials. Then you have the research managers and administrators, and of course, the bigger the research project, the more prominent their roles will be. You have outside consultants, people who may not even be involved in the entire duration of the project, but their expertise is nevertheless crucial to a successful research project. And then there's the public groups that Lucy already talked about as well. Individuals who may be sharing their lived experience, or experience living in a specific place, for example, or experience out, you know, from professional practice. So those are all crucial to making research work. And if you stand back for a second, you may want to describe fair attribution as good relationship management, right? So for everybody to thrive in the research, we need to make sure that we understand what everybody can bring to the table, so what everybody's role is, and we have to then, you know, properly recognize them for the value they bring. And I suppose those are just two really important ways to grow relationship and make them strong and durable. So I think if you look at fair attribution in such a way, it's very important to recognize that this is essential to doing research. Yeah, like I said, team equity and diversity, making sure that everybody can thrive are crucial. That second bullet point here, fair attribution should be established in early team conversation. So the clearer you are from the start about what everybody's going to do and how people can be fairly attributed, and what the processes are for that, the better. Often you have, from my experience, sort of publication policies in which that is spelled out, even to how, you know, certain wording is used in publications. Sometimes that comes from the funder as well, who also want to be acknowledged, of course. And then being clear on the roles and responsibilities will make it easier to manage it. So if you're clear from the outset, then, you know, you basically will be avoiding questions and problems later on. Yeah, I wanted to say a little bit more on how this applies for public groups, but I'll be coming back to that later. So how do you describe contributions? And as Lucy said, there's systems for that to help us figure that out. So the first level of trying to figure out what is fair and how should people's contributions be acknowledged is to think about whether it's an indirect contribution, for example, training or use of equipment or technique, a direct routine contribution, such as collection of research materials or data analysis, or an intellectual contribution. So intellectual input to the research design or output creation. So we can think about these three levels first, and based on each level, you can already think about, okay, where does this name or the name of the service go? So indirect contribution, you acknowledge the facility or the service, so no personal names. Direct routine contribution, it can be both the acknowledgement of the individual and the service. And then the intellectual contribution, it should be the names of the individual and the service. And then at that point, you should also consider whether this person should be a co-author. And being co-author, of course, means that that person also has the responsibility for what the content of what is published. So I'll give back to Lucy now, who is going to dig into a bit more to a deeper level of how you can define the contribution.
Thanks, Karen. So the next slide shows lots of different types of contribution, and these all come from a taxonomy that we're going to have a little look at in a minute. But essentially, these are lots of different categories that were taken from ways to contribute really specifically to journal articles. But I think that a lot of them, they apply to projects as well. And I'm sure you'll recognize the kind of contribution that you make through these roles. So we've talked, about the conceptualization of things, thinking about how ideas begin and get attributed. And as I mentioned earlier, there are so many grey areas in research and idea creation about who makes what. But having a term like that really does help with that early development of an idea and how lots of professional roles at the university really feed into that in research development. Just to pick out a few more, there's the reviewing and the editing process, and it is really, really key because publications so often have one author, but the reviewing is not so different from the writing, and definitely the editing feeds into that as well. So it's having different ways again of unpacking those layers of contribution and being able to pinpoint exactly what people are doing. There's terms there about the project management, which are really important to making a project happen at all, and therefore enabling the research to take place. So these terms are all taken from the credit system or the credit taxonomy, which is that kind of system, that formal way that we can attribute different types of contribution. And it's taken with 14 different roles, most of which I've just shown you on the slide, and it provides that standardized way of attributing individual contributions. So it is a formal system that you can turn to and use, and it's recognized by publishers, it's completely endorsed and used as part of the university guidance, and its uptake has been significant since 2012 when it was developed in that workshop with the Wellcome Trust and Harvard University, to address this need of creating transparency about who is contributing to research as it becomes more and more complex, and those kind of ways that we attribute grow as well. Yeah, so as I said, it's gained international uptake, so it's certainly not just kind of here at the university, this is a recognized system that you can turn to and use. Publishers will recognize that. So it's not I was just another kind of attribution to make on the call. Ben Katz, who's here in the open research team, who was very helpful in clarifying that journals are very open to this. It's not kind of like you'd be having to fight for this method of attribution and to be recognised outside of the institution. And so 22.5% of all publications in 2014 were using the credit system. So it's had a really good uptake. And again, it's linked to here and it's linked to in the guidance. So just to really show you a couple of ways that we've put this into practice. Obviously, as I've said, this is a system that publishers use, but there are all kinds of different outputs, and it's a really helpful system for allowing you to create your own attribution on project outputs that might be not a publication. So we created a website, and you can see on the left-hand side there that we have broken down exactly who has contributed to the website in all kinds of different ways. And that's a statement that we will put on the website now that it's nearly fully developed to ensure that it's really transparent who has contributed to what. And again, in the interest of being as transparent from our own standpoint, a former team member, Zainab Sidak, produced some of the content of this workshop. So again, it's thinking about teams are evolving and research is the long game. So how do we ensure that we keep track of the history of that and make sure that if somebody does leave a project, that the work that they've done and they can go on to be attributed to that work as well. So those are just a couple of examples, really practical ones, but there are wider initiatives going on at the university that relate to fair attribution. So thinking slightly beyond just the taxonomy that you might use on outputs itself, in thinking a bit more of this as a kind of a culture change. York's part of the technician commitment, which absolutely you sign up to this and you commit that technicians working at the university will have visibility, recognition, and paths for professional development. And as an extension of that, there's now a network of technician exchange partnership where technicians can share knowledge, again, collaborate, share opportunities, and have that growing conversation as part of what they do. So that's in large part where fair attribution kind of came from as well, thinking about recognizing technicians and the way that we see it is extending that beyond technicians into professional services staff and the whole kind of research team that Karen mentioned earlier. There are other initiatives going on at the university. So RSVP, I know that Tom and Rena are on the call today doing fantastic work. And one of the things that they're doing is the York Assistant Research Supervisor Scheme. So that is formal recognition for informal ways of supervising. So it might be that you're a postdoc, but you really are sort of almost part of a supervision team, or you're providing some kind of mentoring to a PhD student, and again, technicians and research associates. So that's a formal track to having that work, which otherwise kind of goes under the radar, recognized, and being able to use that as part of your own professional development going forward. And as Karen's mentioned, really being able to attribute research clearly and fairly relies on having that good team relationship, building a team where you are clear about who does what and everyone acknowledges one another's contributions. So some of the training that we do at Valuing Voices is very much embedded in creating an atmosphere of team equity and building on those working relationships to improve equity. So we run, which some of you might already be aware of, facilitation skills session, thinking about project meetings and also work with stakeholders. How do we do that inclusively? And our HR team member Alison runs a session on team profiling. So that's really establishing how you work together as a team. What are your preferences and values at work? And how do you kind of share those as a team in order to work more effectively and more equitably together? So that's just a signpost to a few opportunities and things that are already happening to, as I say, build up that culture of fair attribution. And now I believe it's time to test your knowledge. So I will hand over to Karen for a short game.
It is indeed, Lucy. So we have 3 quick fire scenarios here. And Lucy's going to put up a poll because we would like to ask you to vote, first of all, on the type of contribution. So we said earlier, is it in the indirect contribution? Is it a direct contribution, or is it intellectual contribution? And yeah, we'll see how you get on. So the first question is, a postdoctoral researcher critically reviews an output for fellow members of their research team and suggests edits to the text and commentary on the overall output. Are you going to put up the poll now or in a bit, Lucy? Oh, yeah. Okay. So what do you think? What kind of contribution is being made here?
Just in case anyone's struggling to remember the definitions, I've just put them in the chat as well.
Lucy, do you need to reveal those answers first, or shall I go on to the next one? Okay.
Sorry, nearly everyone's voted now. There's just a few more votes coming through. I'll end the poll, so hopefully you'll be able to see what everyone has said. There we go.
Okay. 6% indirect contribution, 22% direct contribution, 72% intellectual contribution. Interesting, because Lucy and I, before this presentation, had the same discussion as to what it would be. I was thinking intellectual contribution, but and oh, sorry, you were as well, Lucy. But it was about whether it was a co-author. So it's definitely an intellectual contribution, and we think that the right description here would be conceptualization. And I suppose it depends how far the edits go. Do they go to the point where actually it's a rewrite and somebody gets included in co-authorship? But in general, it would be a contribution in which the person is mentioned in the acknowledgement. The second one, a technician or team of technicians obtains data for a single experiment and performs routine characterization, sending data to the user to analyze. So again, would that be an indirect contribution, direct contribution, or intellectual contribution?
I've just launched the poll, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, I will share the results.
Yeah, that's great. It is indeed direct contribution. And we would probably put this under the header of data curation. Okay, third and last one, a research development manager assists a project team to come up with a new ideas for a funding call. The team decides to pursue an idea suggested by the RDM and subsequently publishes an article on the research. So again, indirect, direct, or intellectual contribution.
Right, I'll share the results.
Okay, yes, intellectual contribution, that's correct. So it would be conceptualization in this case. Thank you. Okay, thanks everybody for participating. I hope that helps a bit with practicing your answers. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, and this is fair attribution beyond the team. So I just wanted to give some extra attention to working with people and communities. In most cases, with working with people and communities will be an intellectual a contribution. And the question often is, well, will these people be co-authors or will we acknowledge them? And a lot of the questions is around, yeah, what do they actually do, but also about what's the value of protecting their anonymity. Usually when you involve people at the start of that process, you're guaranteeing their anonymity. And so the question is it worth to them to give up that anonymity in order to be fairly recognized? So that is a question that needs to be considered carefully. And I would say with help from the researcher or the involvement manager to discuss the pros and cons of that. Do you want to be named? Or do you think, well, this is really personal to me and I don't want everybody to know? So in that way, groups and communities may be a special category when it comes to fair attribution. And in any case, it would be advisable to get their written permission if they do decide to give up their anonymity. Another thing is, I mean, we spoke about uh, early discussions about fair attribution. I mean, that's definitely a discussion you can have with people and communities as well. But I think it makes sense that the final decision, whether they want to stay anonymous or want to have their names put on an output, is when they can actually see what is going to be published, so they can make a really informed choice as to what they want to do. Another thing, a specific challenge with fair attribution beyond the team, so with communities and people, is the practical challenge of often you publish outcomes at a time where the research may already be done and the funding is gone. So how are you going to then still try to pay people for their involvement? I think that can be, especially when they're co-authors, that can be an issue. Another practical challenge is that you may not even have recorded everybody's name when you were talking to them. For example, if you're talking to bigger groups, communities, you may not have recorded that, and you may have done that for good reason, because if you start to ask people for the name and personal details, they may not be as forthcoming in terms of sharing their views with you. So that those are some practical things to think about when you're thinking about fair attribution beyond the team. And I'll just give you an example of one of my own projects, which was public involvement in a climate change study. So in this case, we really wanted to do right. This was actually the first time I was actually, really shown what fair attribution meant by the professor who led this study. And so for the study, I went out in the community. I went to a church congregation, spoke to nursery staff, and spoke to members of a knitting group about climate change. So there were about 40 people, and the idea was that they just, frankly shared their views on climate change and climate change policies. So by the end, we really wanted to get the attributions right. So the research team members, we wrote this paper together, so we were all co-authors. The community leaders were then invited to also make a contribution to the paper, especially their perspectives on how we work together. So we invited them to be co-authors, so they were specifically named as authors on the paper and had that responsibility of being responsible for the content of the paper. We had the community members who also made an intellectual contribution, but they stayed anonymous in as far that they didn't have their own names on the paper. They only had the name of the community they were a member of, and that was for those reasons I mentioned before. There was a reason why I hadn't collected names, to make sure there were no barriers to involvement, that people wouldn't hold back. And then I also spoke to an engagement manager at the local council about getting groups involved. And so she helped shape the approach, and so made an intellectual contribution, and she was named in the acknowledgement. So it remains a balancing act in our guidance, university guidance. It says that sometimes there are grey areas, and I think you need to really think about what you're doing and what you're doing it for, and find that balance in doing right, and making sure that people feel like they are valued. So that's just a quick example of how this can be done. And then it's over to Harriet now, who will present the project on fair attribution in global health research.
Thank you, Karen. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Okay. So yeah, good afternoon, and thank you to Lucy and Karen for giving me this opportunity to talk a bit about the FAIR project that was, as you said, funded from the Valuing Voices project. So FAIR in this context stands for Fostering Authorship, Inclusion and Representation, and we were looking specifically on these aspects in global health research. Next slide, please. So our aim initially was to assess kind of existing guidance to see if there are any gaps in relation to global health and kind of north-south collaborations in the existing guidance. And then specifically, we wanted to develop some kind of actionable strategies for global health projects and institutions, and indeed individual researchers, to adopt to encourage greater fairness in authorship representation. And as you'll hear, quite a lot of that involves those kind of community members. That was a kind of particular interest of ours. So the team was led by Dr. Marine Faisal in health sciences, with other collaborating partners both from York and overseas in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Ghana, and Afghanistan. So we had quite a wide-ranging reach through our various global health projects here in health sciences. Next slide, please. Okay, so the project had 4 stages. First, we looked at existing guidance, so the ICMJ recommendations. We looked at the credit taxonomy, we looked at the University of York guidance, and we looked at some guidance as well from universities in Ghana through our team member there. And we used this to generate a series of questions that we put to stakeholders. So we targeted researchers, research support staff, and community members in a survey. And we did have two different surveys, one for community members and one for kind of the academic side of the research teams. And we wanted to find out people's views on intellectual contribution, their experiences of working on papers or not in their organizations, and specifically from community members or peer researchers, whether they'd been offered the opportunity to contribute to publications in a meaningful way, or whether it was something that had just never been discussed with them. And what was really interesting to see was that where community members had received training and opportunities, there was greater interest in contributing to publications. Whereas when we talked to community members in areas where they hadn't had that kind of training or no discussions had taken place, those community members expressed kind of a lack of interest towards being involved. So to us, it seemed like there was this link between, okay, if you give training, if you have these discussions, then you do get kind of a greater interest in being involved. And our survey respondents were from across the world, with the highest representation from Pakistan and Bangladesh, but other countries including Afghanistan, Ghana, Mexico, India, Greece, and some other unspecified European countries. Some people didn't want to kind of pin down where exactly they were from. So we left it so that people could, put in their kind of general area if they wanted to. So we then held consultation workshops to follow up on the main priority areas that were identified in the survey, specifically looking at the feasibility and impact of acting in certain areas. We had these consultation sessions where we asked people to kind of place, we came up with like a list of kind of priority areas that from the survey, kind of the concerns coming out, and then asked people to put those on a kind of an impact feasibility matrix. So basically enabling us to identify, okay, where are the best places that we can have the best impact? Where are the places that we might actually be able to kind of affect some changes with our strategies. And then we co-developed. We had a separate session of co-developing these strategies with stakeholders, and these were primarily with EMCRs from our partner countries. We had kind of limited engagement with senior researchers, which is actually something we then built into the strategies, kind of ways of encouraging or incentivizing buy-in from senior researchers as the people who often hold a lot of power in this kind of fair attribution. Next slide, please. Maybe if you click it again, will it? I wonder if it will move on. Okay, we can go with this. We can go with the visual summary. If you click onto the next slide. Yeah, this is good. Thank you. So this is a visual summary that we designed that has, and I'll put a link in the chat to our website where you can really zoom in on this. And we identified kind of 3 priority areas in which to focus our strategies. And these ranged from establishing clear policies and authorship agreements in projects. So examples like incentivizing the buy-in of senior researchers through academic citizenship roles, or kind of linking good academic citizenship to promotion, which isn't something we encountered too often in our partner countries. But also establishing clear protocols for communicating authorship opportunities to EMCRs and others. Because one of the things that came out of our survey was that a lot of EMCRs said, well, we don't, nobody asks it, nobody sort of suggest to us that we should be part of this authorship process. So that was something that we identified as a kind of gap in those countries. And a consistently prominent concern was marking out time for the people who needed it, whether that was kind of busy postdocs or PhD students, or indeed community members who were interested in getting involved. So some of the feedback from the community was kind of difficulty in, if there was training and opportunities offered, accessing that training and opportunities, either because of the time of day that things were held, or the locations, or indeed the language as well that these things were conducted in. And with regards to community members or peer researchers, we also recognise that providing greater training on publications, authorship and contribution was often needed, as well as more flexible ways of contributing. So again, kind of we thought very hard about how you can engage those members of the research, those non-academic members of the research team, whether that's through having kind of consultations via voice notes and things like that, rather than if people can't get to meetings because they can't get away from their caring responsibilities and things like that. And as I said, here you can see our visual summary. It clearly marks out the strategies that are applicable for organisations, projects and individuals. And we were very keen on demarcating that, sort of giving people a really clear idea of, okay, this is what you could do as an individual. This is what your project could do. And these are the things that organisations should be doing. And it was we designed this in mind to have kind of a document that you could take to meetings, and then it would help facilitate discussions in group and faculty meetings and things like that. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. We have an animated video, which I'll pop in the chat for everybody to watch whenever they like. Here you go. This is an exclusive because we've not shared this on social media yet, and I'll be adding it to the website later today. But there's a link, an exclusive preview for the people in this workshop, and then we have a website which I'll also put there, which has a lot more information about the project. Yeah. And as I say, if anyone has any questions about it, then please either just ask, or I think my email is on the website as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Harriet. Thank you for joining us, firstly, but also thank you for a really illuminating talk, I guess, again, thinking about the clarity and how you make things really clear and producing those structures about where people can attribute. And I think that point about just suggesting it as a possibility in the first instance is really, really key, and hopefully speaks to other discussions that have happened today. And yeah, we've been delighted to fund something like this through the Valuing Voices project. So thank you. The outputs from the project, including what Harriet's shown, are also on our online tool, so that they're freely available for anyone to look at there, and we'll make sure that we share anything following up, including the video in an email after this as well. So I suppose just to, I guess, take a bit of a summary of the things we talked about today, and some of the things that Harriet's touched on with the FAIR principles, is when we're approaching fair attribution, there's also the wider context of contribution. So in order to be named on an output, you have to be able to contribute to that output. So it's really thinking about what kind of output you create. And as I mentioned at the start, there are wider contexts in research that govern the more traditional forms of research output, but there is an appetite and a growing consensus that it's not just the publication and the journal article, it's all kinds of different ways that research is shared, and it's thinking what's the best way for the people I want to engage in that research. And it might not be a publication, it might be something else, or it might be thinking about, as Harriet said, if it is a publication, how do we make that engaging? How do we open up the access to that? So who gets to contribute in the first place and what output is appropriate? And then when thinking about the kind of the details and the systems and how we attribute, it's planning ahead. So it's having those early conversations about attribution and creating a climate in which the ownership of research is something transparent, discussed, a kind of team endeavour. And as we've suggested, you can create a team document early in a project that outlines how members will be attributed. That's also part of a conversation of what everybody's role in the project is and how you're going to contribute in a wider sense. And defining those roles helps you understand how people can contribute as well. And then thinking about a system for attribution. And we've mentioned today a guidance and a credit taxonomy, and Harriet's suggested other ways of making those conversations happen. So there are some practical things you can do there. And getting everyone to agree, really, really key. And yeah, as I've said, there's guidance, there's a taxonomy, there are structures to allow you to do this. So there are things in place to help you ensure that you are attributing everyone in the team. It might look slightly different in every project, but there are formal systems to ensure that this happens. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Any questions, obviously, on the content that Karen and I have presented, but also any questions for Harriet, really welcome. So please do put them in the chat, or if you want to put your hand up, give you a few minutes to think about that. Well, it looks like everything's been fairly clear. Obviously, if you do have any follow-up questions, you can contact us at the Valuing Voices team, and as Harriet kindly offered, you can get in contact with her as well. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much for attending this afternoon's session. Please do go have a look at the Valuing Voices tool. There's lots of information about fair attribution and in a wider sense, not just here at York, but on the tool itself. And there's information, as Karen mentioned, on engagement and impact, which is deeply connected to lots of the things we've been talking about today, and on building team equity. We do run more training throughout the university. I mentioned a few sessions earlier. We'll also be having a deep dive into our environmental sustainability principle later next month. And that's all on the LMS, and I'll put some links in the follow-up email if you'd like to sign up to that as well. And I will send the feedback form along. We'd love to hear any ways we can improve this session. We hope to be running this session again. It may not be Karen and I who run it, but we hope that this is something we can offer at the university to really embed the work that's gone into producing the guidance and making this a kind of culture shift. And in light of that, I do have a final slide that attributes who created the slides as well. So, you know, that's just another little way you can make sure that you're recognizing your team members in all the different kinds of ways that we disseminate our research and knowledge. So yes, thank you very much for joining us and for taking the time out today. And we hope to see you at another session.